Hey, welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I'm thrilled to have Hooman Yazhari with me today. Hooman has an incredible background. He's an attorney by education. Came up through the ranks of corporate America. Served a couple of years with Gate Gourmet, and then went on to ILFC as an attorney, helping with structure. I take it all the lease transactions, the many that ILFC was doing, and it seemed like during the time it was during the great financial crisis or right afterwards. So I'm sure you had your hands full there, Hooman.
Yes. Yeah.
You helped CHC Helicopter through its filing a couple of years ago when cash ran out. And then most recently, Waypoint Leasing, which you restructured and ultimately sold to Macquarie Bank. So that's a heck of a background.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that kind introduction. I've been really lucky. I've been able to be of service. I've been able to be of impact. I've been able to do super interesting things with really wonderful, wonderful people around me from whom I've learned a ton. So it's been really fun.
So you're going to love the story. So one of the best hires I ever made was a guy who was a burned out assistant district attorney in Baltimore.
Right.
And he was prosecuting crack addicts and making like 80 grand a year,
right.
Working 16 hours a day, prosecuting, crack addicts in downtown Baltimore. One day we got introduced and he said, "Hey, look, I think we got a job."
Right.
And we gave him a sales job, and he
right.
was absolutely incredible. And now he's got his own. He's got his own law firm now, and he does great. His name's Chris Nozier. He's phenomenal. What did coming up through the the legal ranks teaches you a lot of different skills. How did you find that your training as an attorney has helped you in the business world?
It's interesting. I always wanted to be a much broader business leader. My father was a CEO of a international company when I was a kid, and when sitting around dinner and listening to what he did for a living, I thought, well, what an interesting role. How interesting for him to have so many aspects from sales to operations to customers to things that affect people's lives and have real meaning. How wonderful for him to be able to do all that. So I thought I'd do law as a training and then see how that takes me forward. I didn't realize that actually, especially 20 years ago when I went to law school in the UK, lawyers are actually, kind of put in the back room and you're given a 500-page contract to mark up and find the missing comma on page 300. And no one really cares what you think about the overall strategy and then
right.
and everything. So it was in one sense, it was a super rigorous training that helps you sift through issues, synthesize them into bite-sized either messages or questions, and then help find answers. And the rigor of a lawyer, a decent lawyer, will always find an answer. There's always a way.
Yep.
The lawyers that people don't like are the ones who say, well, you can't do that. So I always tried to be the lawyer who said, well, you can do that. Is that really what you want to do? And if you do want to do it, here's the answer, and here's the benefits, and here's the downsides, and let's figure out a commercial answer. So with that training, I very quickly realized that in restructurings and turnarounds, especially in private equity-backed businesses, much more of a meritocracy. Didn't matter what your job title was. And in a restructuring where you can't perform your obligations under your contracts, and you need to kind of figure out what the art of the possible is to rethink your business from scratch. The lawyer gets to be front and center. And so I was attracted to the restructuring and turnaround world, got to work with the folks at TPG, got to work with a wonderful management team at ILFC, working with CD&R and again, a wonderful team at CHC. Learned a lot and used my legal skill set to basically help drive a commercial issue forward, which was how do you take a business apart, figure out the bits that are worth keeping, figure out the bits that the market still has a demand for, put it back together in a more efficient and more impactful way.
Yeah, I think you said it early on. It's like, hey, look, we're going to do a deal here.
Yeah.
And the
Yes.
question is, yeah, how are we going to get to where we want to be? Not
Yes.
if we're going to get to where we want to be. And
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the broad thinking. So,
And look, my way of doing a deal has always been to figure out the win-win, figure
right.
out how you can make sure that you get to somewhere where everybody feels happy, because you get people there faster and you get people there with more conviction and more belief. But also being a lawyer, you kind of realize, well, if they're not going to take the carrot, how do you make a stick? And it's always a good strategy to have in your back pocket too.
There you
It
go.
makes the
So,
carrot more delicious looking when the stick is big.
yeah, I got you. So, hey, look, we're gonna roll into a different subject here, but obviously there's a lot of fear out there right now. Boeing, the supply chain was already weakened with the Max. 8,500 airliners now parked. Has got to have every leasing company nervous that every contract is going to get renegotiated. I know there's a big log jam eventually to clear out, but there's going to be there's going to be nervousness in the meantime, both on the airline side of the house and on the creditor side of the house. What how are you seeing how are you seeing all this play out?
There's obviously the short term, the medium term, and the long term, right? And in the short term, you've had this incredible exogenous shock, and I don't think we've had anything like this before. 9/11 wasn't like this. The global financial crisis wasn't like this. SARS, the Iraq War, oil price shock, nothing. It's holistic in how it's affected the whole world, and it's shock and awe in how effective it's been in shutting our industry down. Short term, I think everyone is trying to figure out how to maintain liquidity, because in any business, that's key. That's cash is king is what everyone truly rightly says. And in the medium term, I think one has to figure out, well, what's the answer? And you've got the natural tendency for everyone to look at governments for help and assistance, and I don't really see any other way of doing it. You've got an industry which, through no fault of their own, has had to shut down. Governments have shut down travel, so
Mhm.
it does make sense for the government to step in and help. The right way and the wrong way becomes a matter of personal, political, and practical belief.
Right.
What should airlines give up in return? And should we resent them? We have a capitalist society and a capitalist way of running our businesses. And airlines have done profit maximization, including share buybacks, including making seats smaller, including charging passengers for drinks and suitcases.
Bags and all the other stuff.
Yeah, all that stuff is now coming home to roost. People are like, well, why do we help these people? If you
Right.
think about the vital part that the airline industry plays in humanity in our society, bringing us together. And Zoom is fantastic. We're Zooming now, and it's wonderful. But there's no substitute for face-to-face contact, right? There's no substitute for that human connection that you get when you travel and you sit with someone. And I think as a global society, even though politically we seem to be turning our backs on globalization, the COVID crisis shows us that we're all in it together. And you can't turn your backs on your fellow human beings of different cultures, races, nationalities. And the airline world is the glue that binds us together in many, many ways. I think the governments will bail out the airlines. But if you think about who, it's going to be the flag carriers and the major airlines that governments kind of support and back. And then you have a second tier of private airlines, the low-cost carriers. Some are doing fantastic and have cash and probably will last, but many don't. And many won't have the kind of demand that can keep them going. And they will either restructure and the lenders will give them a runway to carry on for a while to see whether or not it comes back, or they dissipate. And then you have a smaller demand for a global fleet. And I think whoever is left standing at the end of all this, one of the questions becomes, what does the global fleet look like? If we've got 27,000 aircraft flying today, how many will we need 12 months, 18 months, 24 months from now? And given that, everyone would guess that we will have something like 20 to 25% more aircraft, it could be more, it could be less, depending on how long this goes on. Well, what are the aircraft that are going to be required? Is the MAX ever going to make it back? Do you go and lease a 3-4-year-old A320 that has a market value that used to be around 40-ish million, or do you just do with a $15 million 15-year-old aircraft, right? And gas is at 24 Oil is at $24. So do you need the new technology? And I think in the wide bodies and the narrow bodies, the answers are going to be different. Eventually, the old stuff will get parted out and it will leave our fleets. But in the very short term, you could see that economic incentives are not to go with new equipment. So OEMs, I think, are going to have a terrible time over the next 2 years. Who's going to take a brand new aircraft, and why would you want it, right? The supply chain to feed the OEMs, all the parts manufacturers that no one thinks about when you think about government bailouts, the ground handlers, the airline caterers who I used to work for. When no one's flying, no one needs Gate Gourmet.
Right.
No one needs, a ground handler. No one needs a check-in agent. So it's a very, very holistic issue that we have. And yes, we'll save the big airlines, but what do we do with the secondary and tertiary suppliers in that same chain? And how do we treat those people to make sure that they have as much of a shot at, one, making a reasonable living whilst this is going on, and two, that they're resilient and can come back, and the integrity and safety of our supply chain in the airline world continues.
Yeah, no, it's going to be it's just a logjam. It's going to be crowded at first, and it's going to take some time to sort itself out. It's a pure FP&A thing. A lot of the older airplanes that get parked will never see the light of day again.
Yes.
A lot of your midlife airplanes that have value will come out until they are valueless, and then eventually it will go back to Boeing and Airbus. Yeah. I was trading an email with an editor at the Wall Street Journal today, and I just said, hey, my pure speculative, throw a dart at the board opinion is the winners in this whole thing, maybe the A220 and the E2, the E-Jet. 150, 130, 150 seat airplanes, very efficient. Who knows what happens in the short term, but that may be the winner. So,
and what's interesting, Craig, before the COVID crisis hit us, there was a tremendous amount of momentum in the call for environmental awareness in the airline world, right? And I suspect that the noise and the chatter has stopped. No one's talking about what's your carbon footprint anymore to airlines, and it probably won't come back until we normalize, right? But I hope that the airline industry, once we get past this issue, takes and embraces our responsibility to make sure that we are as fuel efficient and as clean as operators as we humanly can be. I don't think it's worth shutting down airlines because they burn a lot of carbon, but I do think it's worth making sure that we are as responsible as possible. And the aircraft that you just mentioned are going to be at the forefront of that, right? And even the ATRs and the regional jets are more efficient in terms of fuel. So I think the industry will have to really holistically think about how we're going to go from where we are today through biofuels, through hybrid, and through eventual electrification, probably 15, 20 years away. But how do we invest in that so that the airline industry is always a model of how industry should behave towards society rather than the bad boy?
Yep. So let's switch channels a little bit here. So Waypoint Leasing was, what'd you have, 150 helicopters in your
166.
portfolio? 166 helicopters in your fleet, mostly servicing the oil and gas industry. And with oil now at 23, well, no, actually it fell again today. So I think it's below $20.
Yeah.
So the O&G helicopter operators were not in a good position a couple of years ago. I'm sure they're in a horrible position today, but you helped unwind Waypoint for its investors. CHC Helicopter had gone through a couple of iterations of itself, and you helped take that through Chapter 11.
Yeah.
ILFC, you've managed through AIG and ILFC through the post financial crisis era.
Yeah.
You've
Gate right after 9/11, when the airlines decided to cut costs, and the first thing you cut is the caterer, because you can't cut your fuel or your landing fees or your lease payments, and the unions are tough to take on, so you go beat up the poor caterer.
So you like the easy jobs, I guess what I'm saying. You're like, hey, just give me the easy stuff and we'll leave the hard stuff to somebody else, huh?
Oh, that building's burning, I'll run in. It comes from a desire to, again, be impactful and to be of service. I think the wonderful thing about a turnaround is that you definitely leave a place better than you found it. and you make that impact in a very short space of time, because usually these things have a very limited cash lifeline anyway. So you don't have much time.
Right.
So you have to make a ton of decisions in a very short space of time. But you know what? The wonderful thing it also is that, I'll talk about Waypoint. It was a team and a business that had just taken the wrong bet. Everyone thought oil was going to go to 200 or whatever it was. So there was a speculative long on oil and gas facing aircraft, and then it didn't pan out, right? So you have a team of wonderful people who are really good at what they do, and you have an industry that's exhausted, a team that no longer has the right business plan and the right set of assets, and it's hard to pivot in the aviation world. Your assets aren't as liquid as selling a pair of shoes. But if you come in as a leader and you help that team emerge from the crisis with a new vision, a vision that's ambitious, a vision that's inspiring, and you inspire the team to build that vision together, and you do so with the uses of culture, a culture of belonging, a culture of safety, a culture of rigorous analytics and over communication, suddenly you see everything pivoting, and suddenly you see everything going from, oh my goodness, we're falling off the side of a cliff, to actually, we are the best helicopter leasing team in the industry,
Right.
as we see it. We see that we have a chance to pivot away from oil and gas to a much broader set of asset classes. And when I joined, we were 93%, I think, oil and gas. And when we sold the business to Macquarie, I think we were 64% oil and gas facing. So diversified away to utility helicopters, or search and rescue and medevac helicopters, and electric lines and firefighting. And you see, well, actually at our core, we're helicopter experts, and we're a financing company. An industry with 72,000 birds flying around is going to need smart people to help it finance itself. So you're not an oil and gas facing helicopter falling down the side of the cliff. You are a bunch of green berets that are going to go figure out how to use your balance sheet and your skill set and your talent and your dedication to your customers and your relationships with MROs and your relationships with the OEMs to get the best for your clients and obviously your shareholders. So it was wonderful to see the attitude change of the whole organization from to look at us. We're just, we're killing it.
So obviously when you take these, Waypoint, ILFC, CHC, when you take these Gate Gourmet, when you take these roles, you're a distressed company. On the other side, there's somebody who's just hoping they get paid. Yeah. I imagine the conversations get pretty tough. And it's like, hey, look, we're going to pay you something. You're going to take a haircut. The biggest, where we meet in the middle is, somewhere. And it's going to, you're going to have to give. I'm going to give, you're going to give. How do you handle those, difficult conversations with the people who are pounding on you for their money?
It's a really good question, and it's very difficult to answer in some ways and actually pretty easy in others. You go and analyze your priorities, right? Who are the suppliers that if they cut you off today, you stop working, and who are the ones that you can walk away from? You figure out your negotiating strength in each position. You figure out your talent retention strategy and who you must have. You figure out, which customers you can't walk away from, and which customers are frankly not going to pay you because they're going to go into trouble. So you look at, what does the market need from you? What is it that you sell and provide that's relevant? And what is it that you sell and provide that 3 weeks ago everybody wanted, but today it's not going to sell? And once you review your own holistic position, my view on it would be to engage with every stakeholder with as much transparency as possible and say to them, we're okay or we're not okay, but here's our plan to be okay, and here's how you fit in. And if you'd like to stand by us and support us when we come out the other side of this, my goodness, is our relationship going to be great, and you're going to be the number one, whatever it is, MRO, lender, OEM, and we will make sure that we come through this together. And sometimes that's a message that goes lands on favorable ears, and sometimes it's a message that lands on nowhere, and people are like, well, that's very nice, but you better pay me, otherwise I'm shutting you down, right?
Right.
So knowing whether or not you can survive and how you would without them is right. But I always find that in life, if you're a proactive communicator and if you're as transparent as you can be, most of your results are going to be a little bit better than, if you just stick your head under the sand and
Yeah.
just hope for the best, right?
Well, it's like anything. It's like, hey, good communication, kills a lot of animosity. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
we're
Because
not,
you're absolutely right. It's trust, right?
trust.
Everything in business comes down to trust.
Right.
And if you talk and if you do what you're saying going to do, and if you're transparent and you show as much information as you possibly can, people trust you, and they'll give you a lot more leeway than if you just leave it to the press to tell your story for you.
Right.
And make people assume that because you are X, you're dead. And the reason you're quiet is because you don't have anything to say, so you're probably not going to pay, and then people just shut you off.
Right. And they get
and it's the same with employees. Like if you're in a global company at in times of crisis, we had 27,000 staff at Gate Gourmet post restructuring. We had 30,000 before, right? So there's 3,000 people that there was no more room for. And I think the only way to do it is to be as transparent as possible and to inform people as much as you can. And also, I'm a huge believer in being as generous to everyone as you humanly can be on their way out. Because in a restructuring, it's not people's fault that they don't have a role anymore. It's the fault of some macro thing or some decision made strategically that has nothing to do with the people on the front line.
Yeah.
So that generosity is also something that I think is morally, ethically, and just from a business perspective, the right thing to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look at, this whole COVID thing, and, in general, I think the airlines have been pretty well run. I mean, some better than others. Southwest has been a good balance sheet, been a well-run airline for a long time. American was, challenged a little bit. Spirit was doing great. It's customer service. They were like, hey, look, we are what we are. Yeah. But in general, from a balance sheet perspective, the airlines were all pretty well run, and the airline comes in and shuts them down. And, all of a sudden now you got thousands upon thousands of employees who are thinking about tomorrow. It's like, hey, look, we'll be as candid. I like Gary Kelly coming out with his, Ned Bastian coming out with their videos and saying, hey, look, here's the challenge. I think good communication goes a long way. I think in a lot of the email generation, something's going wrong, I'll send an email or a text. Yeah. I'm like, hey, your phone's got little buttons on it for a reason.
I agree. As a society, I think we text and email too much, especially with difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And if you run towards the conflict rather than run away from it and hope a text covers your backside, I think you're a much, much more credible leader, and you will win a much higher level of goodwill from your stakeholders, including your employees.
So when you're turning a company around or working on a turnaround, what are you expecting from your employees? You're communicating with them. What are you expecting from them in return?
I expect candor, because usually when you go in, you don't know even a quarter of what the people who've been there for 3, 4, 5 years know, right? It's interesting. When I was at Waypoint, I would say to people, if you had a blank slate and you could rebuild this business from scratch, what would you do? And they'd be like, well, we would go after this market. We would do this aircraft type, and I was like, well, why didn't someone say that to me on day one, right? And it's interesting because when you are a leader, you have to work hard to make sure that people feel safe and protected to speak what they feel is the truth. And it might be a radical different situation to what everyone is sort of pretending is the reality of the business. And this isn't just Waypoint. So I expect transparency, and I would expect hard work. Any leader doesn't like any surprise. So again, it's that openness. I expect my team to be reliable. I expect my team to be educated and measured. So they're measuring the right things and they've thought through everything. I hope that the people that I'm surround myself with, everyone says, if you're a leader, always surround yourself with great people. And, you know, you think about, well, what does that mean? And for me, I'd like people to be coachable. I'd like people to be honest, humble, willing to learn, willing to work hard, being self-aware, and full of integrity and grit, right? And I think if I expect all of this from my team, they should be able to expect it from me. So I hope to lead by example. And if you have a team with that dynamic, I think you'll be fine, no matter what the world throws at you, be it COVID or, you know, God forbid, a terrorist attack or whatever. You're going to be okay.
What are you telling them? You know, so what are you telling them? You know, company's a mess, and everybody knows it. But, you know, look, to turn it, you got to go recruit. You got to go get some, you know, serious, you know, either some new skill sets. You know, look, the banks, the leasing companies, everybody's going to need workout people, you know, coming up in about 6 months. I mean, I was laughing the other day. The busiest people in 3 months are going to be the OBGYNs. You know, where there's, or
divorce lawyers
or criminal attorneys, because the murder rate's going to be high. I don't know. You know, it's like I was telling somebody, the scarf my wife is knitting me looks an awful lot like a noose. I don't know.
Here's your cashmere noose, Craig.
But you know, you got to go get talent. You got to get, you know, different skill sets. And when you're out recruiting them, how are you telling them your vision? You know, it's hey, this company's a mess. Everybody knows it's a mess. The industry is in a lot of turmoil. How do you convince somebody, hey, look, pack up your family, come join my, and this is great for you, for anybody building a team. How do you get them to, you know, embrace your vision for the future?
You know, it's interesting. I've always tried to be ultra candid in interviews. I won't sugarcoat it. I will try to almost scare people off to make them understand that, you know, this is risky, this is difficult, this is going to make you work a lot harder. In return, you will be part of something meaningful. You will have 7 years worth of experience in one. So like dog years, you'll learn a lot. And it could turbo boost your career. So if you're in for that, I will nurture you, I will support you, I will have your back, and I will do everything I can to make you shine like a bright star, because that's how we're all going to win together. And if you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's totally fine. You know, 9 out of 10 people wouldn't want to do this. And people kind of self-select. And it's easy to use that methodology now, where it's very, very true and clear. Even in good times, I would try to sort of, you know, make people understand that there's a lot expected of you here. And if you want to be part of that, come on in. And if you don't, it's totally fine.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's, you know, a lot of people, it's interesting. They tell me, hey, look, I want to be at the place where I can really make a difference. And, you know, but then they're afraid to sort of leave their safety net. And, you know, when I think about, hey, look, there's some great companies out there. There's some great big companies. Yeah, United Technologies, Collins Aerospace, Honeywell, et cetera. You hear a lot of people going, well, I run a $400 million P&L now. Why would I want to go to a $50 or $60 million company? Well, because you told me that you wanted to make a difference. Yeah. And the 50 or $60 million companies, hey, they need A players too. I mean, you know, more so than, you know, it's like I tell it's like the guy in the tugboat, you know, it's the guy in the tugboat needs a really good crew too.
Absolutely. And look, if you've got a 60 million company, I would go in there with a mindset of, I'm going to turn this into a $600 million company, Craig. So it's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. Exactly. I got you. So it's so, you know, how you know, I look at the banking structure now. I look at what the government's doing, putting a lot of money into industries in general. Yeah. I think aviation, aerospace bounces back. I think it's going to be a little while. I mean, look, realistically, I'm usually an optimist. I think realistically, airlines are going to probably not come back. I'm hoping Thanksgiving, Christmas maybe is the catalyst that gets them back to full boat, and then into Q1 2021, but it's probably going to take that long. It's going to take that long to get there.
We'll have a tremendous amount of disruption. I think you're absolutely right. The demand isn't as elastic as a V shape. We don't know when this virus is going to go away and whether it resurges once we ease off on our social restrictions. I think having had 14 good years in the aviation industry and a tremendous amount of capacity expansion, there's going to be a years and years of rebuilding, because I think airlines will go away, the weaker ones. I think the leasing companies that are facing those airlines will go away, and we'll have a glut of aircraft. And then the strong leasing companies, on the one hand, they'll have wonderful opportunities to buy good assets at prices which will look like a screaming bargain compared to where they were 3 weeks ago. On the other hand, they're the ones who are holding gigantic fleets, which they have, borrowed on at previous values.
Right.
So even the good ones, I think, will need turnaround and restructuring folks, because they'll have to go to their banks and say, here's how much our balance sheet is worth, and here's how much our debts are. Here's the new lease rates for these aircraft, because of the overcapacity will bring lease rates down. You're a leasing company, having been one myself twice in my life, and there's no demand for your asset. The only tool you have is to reduce your price. But you still bought that asset at a certain number, and you still have debt and interest payments at a certain number. So you're going to have to figure out, well, how do you square the new lower pricing with the new, with your old structure? So everyone's going to have to go through a change. The airlines are going to have to go through a change because their capacities will have to shrink. The MROs, there's going to be less of them. The end of life part out and storage guys, I think, can go start to think how they expand and grow. They'll probably benefit from all this. The ground handlers, the caterers will have really, really difficult times, and they'll have to keep their operations intact and be able to accordion their way back up as the airlines flow. So you're absolutely right. This is a multi-year rebuilding of an industry. Hopefully we come back stronger, and as we said earlier, more socially aware of the importance of this business. And I wonder whether the regulators will force us to do that.
Well, hey, look, that could be the MAX, the MAX thing,
Yes.
And look, the last MAX issue, the wire bundles under the cockpit, my personal, opinion, unfounded opinion, just an educated guess, is that was the FAA proving one more time to the world that we're boss. We'll look at everything, and the airplane will not fly until they say it's ready to fly.
Right.
That's it. But, on the flip side, there was a lot of new money coming into the industry. It came in late. It was, a lot of people probably had no business investing in engines and airplanes and whatever else came in, and they were paying top dollar for everything. They'll get flushed out. It's the strong will get stronger. It's less of what this thing is doing to us in a lot of ways, but what it's doing for us. And it could bring back a lot of players even stronger than they are now.
I think that's right. And look, unfortunately, off the back of this difficulty, there'll be some incredible buying opportunities.
I think so as well. Boeing's going to be here in 10 years. Airbus will be here in 10 years. GE engines and Rolls-Royce and Pratt & Whitney will be around in 10 years. It's great technology. So, hey, I appreciate you coming on today.
I appreciate you having me. What a
really
pleasure.
Really good conversation. You coming back?
For sure. You name the time, I'll be here.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Hooman. I appreciate you having on. Coming
Thank
on.
you.
Stay safe down in Texas, and let's get you back on in a few weeks after this thing clears out, and we'll talk about what the aftermath looks like.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Awesome.